Welcome back to DevOps Pro Conference 2022. We are here on the third day, and we're going to kick off this track with exactly where we stopped yesterday. We had discussions about Git and a wonderful session by Phil on how to use Git. And we also had discussions about PlanetScale. And this is exactly what we're going to do today, from GitHub to PlanetScale. And we have Lilli and Johannes, who used to work for GitHub earlier, and now they work for PlanetScale. And yeah, it's all you, Lilli and Johannes. Now let's dive right in.
Thank you so much. Perfect. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. It's very nice to meet you. Thanks for taking the time to attend our session. We were really, really looking forward to it. Would have been nice to see you in person, but now we're going to make it fun online as well. And we have a couple of questions for you. So we want to make sure that you're also engaging. You might see in the chat that there is a poll button, so please click on that, because my very first question that I want to ask you is whether, like, who of you knows database branching and merging and has used it before? So if you could respond to that, we have a little lag. It's in the poll section on the top, I believe, the very top. So if you can respond to that, that would be amazing.
So far, we received 3 votes, but I guess we can already publish the existing poll, and then see whether it's still possible to take part in it. Well, yeah, now people are starting, and at least when we were doing those talks live, we have seen that in the majority of all the cases, the version control, branching, and merging was very well known and very much established, whereas in database, it was still a very new concept. And that's probably the case because branching and merging, especially in GitHub or GitLab, is a concept since many, many years, at least 15 years. And I guess some of you might still remember the times before Git, like the Subversion times or the CVS times. We do have a second poll for that one to just see whether you still know about Subversion or other version control before Git, right? There was a time like this. I particularly remember because I started my career in 2007 at CollabNet, the founders of the Subversion open source project. And we already had branching and merging. However, it was so complicated to use that we internally were joking around that the best merging and branching strategy is to actually not merge at all, right? And we were working on something better to make it easier with merge tracking in Subversion 1.5, and thought we had a good idea. And then the famous talk from Linus Torvalds at Google happened, where he was not only introducing Git, but was also making a lot of fun of CVS and Subversion. And I'm not sure how many of you remember that talk. It was really tough for me during that time listening to Linus, but I thought nowadays, 15 years later, it's probably okay to share a couple of seconds out of it, because it very well fits what Linus said. He definitely had a point.
Nobody is interested in branching. Branches are completely useless unless you merge them. And CVS cannot merge anything at all. You can merge things once, but because CVS then forgets what you did, you can never ever merge anything again without getting horrible, horrible conflicts. Merging in Subversion is a complete disaster. The Subversion people kind of acknowledge this, and they have a plan, and their plan sucks too. It is incredible how stupid these people are. They've been looking at the wrong problem all the time. Branching is not the issue, merging is.
Well, that was Linus, and he had a point by saying branching is not the issue, merging it. It was kind of his unique style of making fun of other people and calling their stuff not great and that it actually sucked. And he had a point, for sure. But to use his own words, Git itself was brilliant, but its usability sucked too. Actually, the founders of GitHub were listening to this talk as well. And they were initially not interested in building GitHub, but just using Git for their own projects. And while trying it out, it was so difficult for them that they were constantly cursing about it on Twitter, and finally decided to build a UI on top of it, which you might have guessed that already now, was called GitHub. But it was not only the UI that made GitHub so successful, it was also the so-called GitHub flow, right? What you can even see on t-shirts. So we were printing t-shirts at GitHub. And when I say we, I joined GitHub a bit later from the guys who invented Subversion, where I met Lilli, who was already working at GitHub at this point. So I want to hand it over to Lilli to just give you a short reminder of what the GitHub flow is all about.
Thanks, Johannes. Yeah, most of you probably have worked with it, whether open source or at work. And then again, we're talking about GitHub because we came from there, but like a lot of the examples that we're going to give are going to be relatively the same on other Git-based tools, right? But let's dive right into it. So of course, on GitHub, when you want to make changes to your code, the first thing you would do is create a feature branch on which you perform the changes. So you make your commits, and then eventually, after you have been doing that, you open a pull request. The pull request, of course, being like the trademark thing that GitHub always had. Fun fact, actually, the laptop that you can see here is the laptop that the pull request has been invented on. That is in the GitHub Museum. So if ever you're in San Francisco, make sure to swing by the office. It's nice anyway. But fun aside, so you open up the pull request mainly to get it reviewed by your colleagues or your mates that you're working on the project with, and also to discuss it, whether it makes sense, and be able to later see why a certain decision had been made. Then at GitHub, that was the point where when we were happy with the changes that we've made and there was no conflicts, we would ship it. And we shipped like 500 times a week. That was very easy. Most of the ships, most of the deploys that we did, they didn't have anything to do with the database. So they weren't database related in any way. And therefore, we could do it really quickly. Oh yeah, go ahead.
The main
Johannes.
point, though, is that while Linus Tor was already saying it, branching is not the issue, merging is, and we managed with the GitHub flow to make this really, really fast when it was about just code. And we were talking, including Lilli and us, on conferences, how often we shipped using the GitHub deployment API to production, but it was mostly code only changes, which was straightforward and super easy, right? High deployment frequency. When it came to database changes, though, again, stressing Linus, branching is not the issue, merging is. But when database gets involved, to complete a sentence by another celebrity, one does not simply merge database changes to prod. Why is that? Well, on this slide, we have summarized some of the quotes we got during our time working at GitHub. In a nutshell, the biggest difference between version control and databases is that in version control, you can see what other teams are currently working on. You can see whether there will be potential merge conflicts. You can see what other teams will contribute to your production branch probably quite soon. In the database world, it's perfectly possible that you're, for instance, working on a column and add an index to have better performance, whereas another team wants to change the type of the column for another kind of optimization. And while those changes work perfectly in isolation, in combination with the index, it could be, for instance, horrible performance results in production. And you would only find out in the moment those things actually get merged into production. Things can even be worse. Imagine you are dropping a table because you think nobody's using it anymore, and another team just wants to revive that table. That actually happened at GitHub to one of our founders. He was dropping a table, another team was just using, again, for a feature where it was not used in the past. And with dropping the table in production, we actually lost data. Now you can go back to a backup in the database world as well. But if you do so, you would lose all the data that has been written since then. And for us, it was easier to grant everybody affected GitHub commercial features for free for life, as opposed to risking the data loss or the potential data loss over there, which brings up another important difference. Data weighs a lot. If it's terabytes of data, they weigh a lot in comparison to source code, where you can just revert a change in no time. With data, you either need a backup and you have to always obey the laws of physics. So if you're, for instance, adding a column to a table with billions of rows, it will take minutes, hours, or even days before that operation is finished and all the disks involved. We also figured that out the hard way when we were trying to change the issues table in GitHub. So GitHub issues is using a table with more than 2 terabytes of data. And when we tried to add a column, it started the copy operation in the database, and that copy operation took multiple hours. The problem is, during all of that copy operation, there was a metadata log on the table, meaning you couldn't write at all to that table until that full operation was finished, and there was also no easy way to cancel it. Basically, hours of not full downtime, but not being able to write any issues. So we got on Hacker News. A couple of weeks again, similar incident happened, Hacker News again. And we didn't want to go on Hacker News for the wrong reason. So it got far less likely that we even changed big database tables at all, right? Because our ops team were telling us, well, terabytes do not simply change over a weekend, and we don't want to become on Hacker News. And if we got to a point where we were really careful about adding any features touching the database at all. You might have noticed between 2014 and 2016, there was not lots of new features on GitHub. And the reason was that we barely kept the database alive. Our workflow then looked very traditional. We were writing code. In the moment it was affecting any database changes, it had to be reviewed by a database panel of experts. And this review also made sure that all the changes which were currently going on in parallel would be serialized. We did risk assessment. We decided to apply them during times when there was not lots of traffic on GitHub. But guess what? GitHub got more and more popular, and there was not such a time where nobody was using the platform. It was always peak production time for somebody on the globe. So it got really, really difficult for us.
I'm gonna quickly jump in and interfere for a second. So I've been having quite a lot of questions coming into my mind so far. So I'm sure our audience also has quite a lot of questions right now. I would encourage everybody to post your questions into Q&A box on the right top, and please make sure to upvote the questions that you feel needs to be taken first. And I'm sorry about that. Let's continue from here.
No problem at all. Thank you for bringing that up. So thinking of the workflow that Johannes just explained, when we came from GitHub to PlanetScale, we were trying to think of the best way to explain this. And to us, it seemed a bit like we've met all of those companies that invest a lot into their DevOps lifecycle. All of those amazing tools cost a lot of money to make the workflow as quick and beautiful and easy and nice to work with as possible for developers. And then it's like driving on a German Autobahn without like a speed limit. And then eventually, you hit the Italian toll station and you're just in a traffic jam because the system simply isn't designed to let as many cars through. And this is basically when you reach your database before you want to do a deploy. So this is the point where you're being stopped. In sum, this basically means it's just very hard to work with databases. That's the conclusion. So Johannes, we're done with the talk now. We can go home, right?
Of course. I mean, we're already home, unfortunately. But no, jokes aside, it would be kind of boring if this was just databases are hard. They are the pampered child that doesn't have to fit into the DevOps workflows, deal with it, end of story. Actually, we're here to tell you that non-blocking schema changes are real. So at GitHub, we were developing an open source tool called Ghost, GitHub online schema change tool. The two main developers are now also working for PlanetScale. And the main idea is that we are not doing any changes on production database tables directly. Instead, we create a shadow or ghost table that is first created with the same schema as the original table. Then we apply the anticipated schema change, and then slowly, so that production is not affected, we are copying data over from production, yielding to production traffic, and see whether the schema changes work there. And then we are using MySQL's replication feature, intercepting the bin log, to catch up with any kind of changes that are happening in the original table since we started copying from the ghost table, so that eventually both the original table as well as the ghost table are in sync, apart from the schema changes we wanted to see in the ghost table. And then we can swap those tables atomically. We can do a cutover. It takes a couple of seconds still, but during that time, we just cache in-flight queries at the proxy layer in front of it, so that for the users or the application effect, there's actually no downtime and no write logs on the database tables at all. That's Ghost in a nutshell. And similar to Git, Ghost is beautifully designed, but quite hard to use. We just got a comment yesterday from a blog post that Ghost is quite hard to use in isolation. So we thought maybe this is the case similar to Git to GitHub for Ghost, and also the underlying database technology based on Vitess. Why not have a company that is specialized in making databases as easy as the rest in the DevOps lifecycle? And as you can see from PlanetScale's team DNA, many folks joined from GitHub, surprise, surprise, including Lilli and myself, but also many folks from other big companies where they were running database infrastructure like Booking.com or Twitter, and then many folks from YouTube and Google, where the underlying database technology, Vitess, and running MySQL and Kubernetes has been developed. So when talking about the difference between just having a tool and having a full platform, we also needed something similar to the GitHub flow. And this is where the PlanetScale flow comes in. And giving it to Lilli to talk us through the PlanetScale flow and give us a demo.
Yeah, as you can see, very similar, right? No surprise there. So we wanted to make schema changes as easy as possible. So we created a web interface and a CLI to do this, basically. The first step is you create a developer branch. When you branch a database, it means that the exact same schema as from the main branch, so used in your production branch, will be used in an isolated developer branch. So that's where then you conduct your schema changes and you open a deploy request, very similar to the GitHub pull request or the merge request on GitLab. So then that means it can be reviewed. You can resolve any conflicts that you see. You can even test it in isolation with your application and see if everything is working. And all of that you do before finally you deploy it and then merge it back into the main branch again. So as Johannes said, we also want to demo how exactly this works and what this looks like. We have not so nice times going on right now, so we thought we will add a little bit of magic to our lives and to your lives. So we will also show you how to travel back in time in the database world. If you've watched the Harry Potter movies, maybe you can remember Hermione having this little device to travel back in time and change the past. So we will get to that. But for now, without further ado, let's jump into the demo. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Right. So this whole demo is based on a GitHub repository. The GitHub repository that I'm showing here, Node Express, PlanetScale, and Harry Potter, lives in our PlanetScale demo organization, but it is a public repository, so you can use it to try out PlanetScale as well if you want to. The nice thing is that it's basically a database including all the Harry Potter characters and their attributes. So this is the repository. Maybe Johannes can paste the link for you in the chat. But before we talk about any source code, let's maybe jump into the PlanetScale UI to show you what that looks like. So this is my PlanetScale overview. This is where I log into, which, for instance, I can do using a single sign-on, two-factor authentication. You can use your GitHub profile as well to sign up and log into PlanetScale. And then what I can see on the top left here is the organizations that I am part of. So right now, as you might have guessed, the PlanetScale demo organization is the one that we want to work in. And then within an organization, we can have several databases. As you can see, there's a lot of databases that we have been using here. The one that we want to work with for the sake of this demo is the Harry Potter database. This is the overview of my database where I can see, for instance, my row reads, my row writes, the storage that I am using at the moment, how many branches I have in this database, how many tables are in the database. So pretty similar to databases you might have been using so far. You can also see the query statistics on the Insights tab. So you can see the queries that have been used in the past 24 hours. And if there's anything that needs to be made better and improved on the queries. And then where PlanetScale really differs from a lot of other databases that you would have been working with so far is this. So as you can see, we have the main branch, of course, and then we already have a developer branch, which is named here Remove Magic. So for now, let's go into the main branch. We can see that there is, let's look at the schema. So as you have seen before, there's two tables. One which includes the wands that the wizards in Harry Potter own. And then the other one, which includes all the attributes about the Harry Potter characters. So this is the name, this is the house that they're part of in Hogwarts, the magic attributes like the patroness, for instance. So this is the table that would be most important for our demo at this point. We also have a console, and this is what we want to try out. So we can find out more about the tables themselves. For instance, let's see at all the attributes just to make sure that they are all in there. So we can see Harry Potter, all the rows that are describing the characters. Actually, the magic attributes are in here. These are the ones that we want to remove as part of this demo, which is obviously a very bad idea, because what is Harry Potter without the magic? But we will try it anyway for a little challenge for ourselves. We can also count the columns, for instance. So we can see that there's 403 characters in this database right now. We also want to make sure that the main characters are part of the database. So let's check whether we have Harry Potter, Hermione, and Ron. So the trio is there. You can see the magic attributes are here as well, the patroness, for instance. And now, as I said, we want to remove the magic from the characters. So we're going to remove magic.
Lilli, would you mind to zoom in a little bit?
Of course.
That's good. Perfect.
Yeah, is this better?
That's good.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for pointing that out. Right, so we hit a snag here, and it's not because the demo gods aren't with us, luckily, but it is because we're working on the main branch, and PlanetScale does not allow us to make schema changes on the main branch, mainly because we want to protect you having cold sweat on your face when actually you're realizing you have been deleting something that you shouldn't have been deleting. So the nice thing is that PlanetScale already suggests me to create a new branch. So let's look at this. We can call it the Remove Magic branch, because that's what we want to do. We can also select the region. So let's say, for instance, we want to select Dublin or Frankfurt, because for many of you, these are probably the regions that are going to be closest to it. And then we can just create the branch. As you have seen, we already have a branch created for you, so we're not going to do this right now here. but we're going to change to the remove magic branch that is already created. And then we can also check actually whether the schema is the same. So if we look at the attributes, so the rows that are present in the table, you can see all of them are here. So the magic attributes are still here. And now we will try to remove the magic one more time. Now it looks green. So it seemed like it worked, right? So let's go back to the main overview here. And now we can create a deploy request so that Johannes can maybe review my changes. I can also connect to my application. I can also connect to the framework and work with the framework that I want to work with. So for instance, let's say I want to work with Java, or I can also work with Prisma to connect and test an isolation. So I will create this deploy request now. And the nice thing is it's really what you see is what you get kind of thing. So you can also see what the changes exactly are in the schema that you're making here. So now I've shown you how all of this works on PlanetScale and the UI itself. But as the title of the talk promises, we also want to show you how this works together with the pull request and with when you're working on GitHub or another Git tool, because most likely you would like to integrate it a little bit further with your development workflow. So handing over to Johannes.
Thank you. I will go ahead and share my screen again. Just a second. Sharing screen number 2. Yeah, you have seen Lilli's deploy request over here, which I could merge, where she already said what kind of columns were changing, and you would also see if somebody else has changed something in between, for instance, so that it's not too possible that two people in different teams are trying to merge the same thing, or you would be warned automatically. But as Lilli said, in many cases you are not working in a tool like PlanetScale, but you're working in GitLab or GitHub and want to integrate it directly into your pull request. And this is what I like to demo right now. So the demo will start similar to Lilli's one, but it will go further. And at the end, we will even turn back time using the magic time turner. So I will create a copy of that repository I also shared in the chat that Lilli uses by clicking on the green button, use this template, and creating a copy of it. I will call it DevOps Pro Vilnius. And the reason I'm doing this is I like to encourage all of you to do similar things after that talk is finished, or you can even follow along if you wanted to, because all of the examples we are doing right here can be done by you on an iPad, even without anything else but clicking a couple of buttons. Because when you copy a project on GitHub, it also copies its repository structure, and we put some GitHub action workflows into it. And those GitHub action workflows, they can be triggered manually as part of the workflows tab. So if you wanted to create a database in PlanetScale by your own, including the Harry Potter characters in it, you would just run that one workflow. Now you might ask, well, how would it know about my PlanetScale account? How would it know about the credentials? Well, the way we've solved this is by providing you either service tokens, but we don't want to set service tokens right now. We want to do this all from an iPad, for instance, or as easy and smooth as possible. And in order to do that, we are using the PlanetScale CLI inside GitHub Action Workflows to provide you a link for SSO. So if you do have any account, it will just use that. Otherwise, it will ask you to create one, and then it's authenticating it. It will fail in my case. It won't fail for yours, because in my case, the database is already there, right? That's the Harry Potter Jonico database. It's very similar to the one you have seen from Lilli already. It just has one master main branch. so far, right? The remove magic branch is just when I tested the demo already. And inside that one, we do have all the magic attributes. We want to remove them again, but this time integrated into the pull request workflow from GitHub. So in order to do that, we will go to our code and change something in code first, because code changes go together with database changes. We decided, for the sake of simplicity, not to do a big code example, but just modify the README file over here, because README Markdown is something everybody understands. I'm just inserting a snippet over here, which will make it possible to show the preview of what we've just done. Just a second. Here we go. So showing you the diff in the Markdown. I'm basically just saying we want to make all wizards and witches to ordinary people. Although it's a terrible idea, we want to remove those columns or attributes from the table, and this is the workflow we were going to use. And if there was no rewind or real magic, we would be unlucky, but unfortunately you will see there is actually. So let's create a pull request with those changes. Let's try to remove all magic from Harry Potter and make witches and wizards ordinary people. We can call this remove magic, for instance, as the feature branch, and propose those changes, right? So this will create a pull request, and we are just giving some more details about that pull request, that it's what we're going to do, removing the magic attributes, and click on create pull request. So far it's just code changes, right? The Markdown changes, but any other code changes we want to have as well. Now we want to do the corresponding changes in the database and create a feature branch in the database as well. And we could do that from the PlanetScale UI, but it's also possible to do this directly from GitHub with a concept called issue ops. So in this particular case, we want to use a command that is creating a new feature branch and is already applying some changes to the schema, some DDL changes with it. So it's also possible, and in production settings, it's more likely that you just do /ps create, would create a feature branch in the database and link it to this pull request. And then you would connect to it with your application, and your ORM would actually do those schema changes like Flyweight or Ruby on Rails or any framework of your choice, right? It's just easier to demo it like this if we're not having the additional complexity of an ORM now for the demo. You see, this is already being looked at by GitHub Actions, and this guy will also tell me that I need to approve those things. At the end, we are still modifying something in a feature branch. So I'm going to GitHub Action workflow, which is currently running, and will again confirm this operation. And as I said, in a production setting, I would probably have a service token set here or some claim instead of doing it with a web-based authentication flow. This is the time in the demo where we have to pray the most to the demo gods, because now we are actually creating a new feature branch in the database. And this is not just a single database, it's actually a full Kubernetes cluster, which is using Vitess, so running MySQL in this Kubernetes cluster with multiple replicas to fail over, also having the components for denial of service protection and thundering herd protection. So all the good stuff of the Vitess project, which Lilli will touch in a moment in more detail. But even in that case, it should be done in about, I would hope, 10 seconds, that we actually then have our new feature branch with the DDL changes. Here we go. It's ready now, so we can go to our pull request, and it should have been updated already. Let's check. And yeah, the database branch and deploy requests are created successfully. Here's also how you could connect to it with the PlanetScale CLI, and we would also see what kind of schema changes are needed or are computed at the moment. I don't want to merge this right now because I like to have a 4i principle, and I would even not be allowed to merge if I wasn't an administrator. So Lilli, can you go ahead and prove that pull request for us, please? So Lilli starts to approve this. Again, doing it directly from GitHub. The concept we are using here is called issue ops. So if you're going to the workflows directory, you see that GitHub workflows or action workflows, they cannot only react on pushes, but also on any kind of GitHub event. For instance, if somebody was commenting in a pull request. So those are the commands in question, and it's just a proof of concept to show how you can script the PlanetScale CLI with this issue ops metaphor so that you have full transparency of who approved what. So let's go back to the pull request and see whether it's already approved. No, it's currently still running, but I can already see how to connect, for instance, to that pull request. There's a one-time link so that you can also once find out how to connect to it outside of the UI. In an open source project, it's important that if you try this again, it has already been retrieved so that not strangers can see how to connect to your database. And nowadays, you can also see that it has been approved. So we can go to the deploy request and the web UI. Lilli gave a looks good to me. And I will now click that button right here in the UI. Normally, there's also other possibilities, like I could do /ps merge in the issue ops fashion directly out of GitHub. But in this case, I actually want to do it from here. With ps merge, you would also get deploy events sent in GitHub and required status checks for your protected branch settings. The reason why I'm showing it here is that you can also see that it's still possible to revert that change. Like we could also revert a pull request in GitHub. Why is that of interest or not trivial? Well, if we go to our main branch now and we check what happened to our 3 famous Harry Potter characters, you see that they are still there, of course, but all of their magic is gone. This is, of course, a mistake. We now realize our mistake. We want to go back, but we don't want to go back to a backup because in a normal setup, you would have frequent updates to your database. So for instance, if anybody can go in time, it would be Hermione with the time turner. So let's update her record first. So she's now part of House PlanetScale. And we also want to be wizards and witches. So we also insert Lilli here in the database, and we also insert myself. Right? So now we do have 2 new records, and we have 1 updated record. And we don't want to lose any of this in the moment we want to fix our mistake in the past. We want to bring the magic back, but hopefully Lilli and I shouldn't be wiped out from history. So in order to do that, we will go to the overview page and have a look at our deploy requests, and we'll revert it now. So we will use our fancy time turner one more time and hope that the magic actually works. So we are reverting those changes. And this is actually switching the shadow table and the original shadow table and original table back. So we are keeping a copy of all the data which has been changed since then and copying it in 2 tables. We're now going back to our console in the main branch. We will list the first 3 characters again. And here we go. They are still there. Their magic is back. You see Ancestry and Patronus. Hermione still is in House PlanetScale, and we are also still in the database, at least I hope so. Right, so Lilli and myself are in there as well. As said before, this is not just integrated with GitHub. It can work with any other CI/CD solution. We do have a CLI for this, which we can script for any kind of use case. And we also have a repository link in the slides where you can build your own issue ops or more complex workflows with lots of examples already. If you have an own example, you can even win some swag. You would go to that project and say, create a new issue as a community usage example. So if you have anything you want to show with us, how you're using PlanetScale and scripting the CLI, just fill out the issue template and there will be some swag on your way. With that said, giving control back to Lilli.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, I also added our Twitter handles in the chat already. So like if you want to tweet us with questions while you're doing that, feel free to do that. I think there's one main last point that we needed to get to, because so far we have been talking a lot about the technology that makes merging possible, but we haven't really talked about the underlying technology that we use for our database. And like Ghost does, we also rely on proven open source technology, which is Vitess. Vitess is these days a CNCF graduated project, which had originally been started by YouTube and built by YouTube to deal with petabytes of data and many database connections per second. And it was used to scale their MySQL setup on Borg. These days, it's running on Kubernetes. And there's a lot of companies that are using Vitess next to GitHub, which you might have guessed by now. So for instance, Stripe, Slack, Vinted, Shopify, and so on. All of these companies, they actually scale their setup with Vitess. And some of these are working with PlanetScale as the managed offering of Vitess, basically.
Yeah. You don't have to have the biggest, you don't have to be as big as those logos, right? On PlanetScale, you can even start with small databases for free. So this workflow and everything is something that is also nice, independent of whether you're already dealing with terabytes of data, right? What we actually want is that you're not feeling blocked by the database anymore in your DevOps workflow. It should always feel like German Autobahn. Well, we cannot change the laws of physics, right? You still need to copy data around. It's asynchronous, as you have seen with Ghost, that is used in the background. But at least it's something like a free pass. And during our time at CollabNet with Subversion and at GitHub, we figured that having a concept like branching and merging alone is not sufficient. You need a metaphor, you need how to use it, like the GitHub flow, you need the usability on top of it, but and sometimes also a little time and luck and market fit. But once it takes off, it's great. I mean, nobody can nowadays imagine branching and merging in version control that without Git, right? That's just a given. The database world, we are still at the very beginning of it, and we hope that we can learn from the journey at GitHub already and have a nice UI and also metaphor how to use it with a workflow. But at the end, it's only you who can tell us whether we made our job. So please try out PlanetScale and provide us the feedback.
Yeah, and with everything that we do, we always think of what is the best for developers. Like, what can we do to make everything easier in the database so that you actually really like to work with it? So if, as Johannes said, if you have feedback, please send it to us. Also, we have launch week this week, so we're launching a new feature every day. I've put the link in the chat, so check it out if you want to know more. Thank you so much for listening, and looking forward to questions.
Wonderful. By the time our listeners put the questions in the chat, I have some questions for you. So we looked at the queries and query logs of databases, but do we have database logs of authentication that has been happening? How many users did log into my database, and how many times they did query? If yes, It also leads me to another question of mine: how do I assign roles to my databases, and what does the roles do? And
Yeah.
do you have any insights in that direction?
So we do have an audit log in PlanetScale. In the enterprise plans, you can see who is connected, and we can also we are also working on ideas to forward this to something like Splunk or other things. Also, yesterday we just launched PlanetScale Connect to connect all events in the database with other platforms, ELT and ETL platforms. The roles so far, we have admin and ordinary members, but also quite soon we'll get to read-only connection strings and to more fine-grained permissions.
Wonderful. These are many of these questions which I often get from my clients at IFICode. So now I have answers and directions to point towards one of those nice databases that we have. Wonderful that we can do things from CLI only and from web app only, and it's one of those nicest features I've seen with PlanetScale. Another question I have is about the actions that GitHub Actions integration that we have seen. So some of those databases like Zuora or Snowflake, they give features like being able to generate reports on a daily basis or a weekly basis, and this can be done easily with GitHub Actions connection. But do we have actions plugins from PlanetScale that has been planned in schedule, or are we going to use SQL queries for doing that?
Well, SQL is very, very powerful. You can use the PlanetScale CLI with a command pscale shell to directly run the SQL queries and get the output. I guess SQL itself for getting reports, at least the raw data for the reports would still be my preference, and then it depends on the visualization layer. But you could, for instance, create a CSV file and then serve that CSV file, or even query it from a GitHub page that is then using some front-end technologies like Vue to visualize.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And we are running over time already. I will stop with one last question. So, what is the next big feature PlanetScale is going to release? And do you want to break it now, or do you still want to keep it under your hood?
We are not allowed to. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. So actually, we gave a little hint away during the demo already today. But it's under press embargo and it's launching tonight. So it's like morning US time. So the website that I added to the chat, check it out. I think around like 5 or 6 it should be on there, but I think you're really, really gonna like it.
Wonderful. It was a really nice session. Thank you very much. Yep. Thank you very much for your time, and looking forward to see what PlanetScale brings to DevOps community in the future.
Yeah, and
Thank
please
you so
create
much.
accounts. Please create accounts, right? It's free for your hobby database. Would love to see what you're doing with our technology. Thank you so much.
Thank you.